Picture the ultimate utopia. Like, really picture it for a second.
Right, staggering wealth, universal health care.
Exactly. A society where citizens routinely live well into their mid-80s, backed by, top-tier education and a social safety net that catches almost everyone.
It sounds like they've basically won the game of civilization.
By nearly every traditional metric we use to measure human progress, they absolutely have. So why, when you look at one specific, newly introduced United Nations metric, does this exact same perfect country suddenly plummet 122 places down the global charts?
Yeah, landing at an abysmal 155th in the world. It's jarring.
It's completely wild. So today, we are tearing apart the economic X-ray machine. We're doing a deep dive into a massive, comprehensive data set from the UN Development Program, and we're focusing on the ultra-wealthy nation of Luxembourg.
And our mission here is really to track how the world's most developed country effectively, fell from grace, just by changing the lens through which we view success.
Right, the whole paradox of prosperity.
Yeah.
Because it forces a total cognitive reset, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, for decades, we have operated under a very specific assumption about what progress actually looks like.
Yeah, that lifting people up, giving them longer lives and better education is just an unalloyed good.
Exactly. But the data sitting in front of us creates this terrifying tension. It asks you to look at the absolute pinnacle of human development and realize that the machinery required to sustain it,
The actual engine running the whole thing.
right, that machinery might be mathematically incompatible with the survival of the planet.
Okay, but before we look at the collapse, we really need to understand the pedestal this country is standing on.
We have to look at the triumphs first.
Right. So if you rewind the clock to before 1990, the global community basically had one blunt instrument for measuring whether a country was doing well: gross domestic product.
Good old GDP.
GDP. It was all about the cash register. Like, how much stuff did your country make and how much did you sell?
Which is, frankly, an incredibly flawed way to look at human well-being.
Oh, totally.
I mean, think about the mechanics of GDP. If a country just clear-cuts all of its ancient forests and sells the timber, well, its GDP skyrockets.
So on paper, they look incredibly successful.
Right. But in reality, they've just liquidated their natural wealth. They've left their citizens with a barren landscape.
Or, consider a nation with a massive oil boom where a handful of executives become billionaires, but the average citizen is illiterate and dying of preventable diseases at age 45.
Exactly. Under a strict GDP lens, that country is somehow thriving.
Which makes no sense. And that brings us to the paradigm shift. The UN realized you can make $1 million a month selling terrible, unsafe food, but that doesn't make you a Michelin star restaurant.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. So in 1990, they introduced the Human Development Index, the HDI. They decided to look past the cash register.
Right. They started grading countries on 3 foundational pillars.
A long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
And the HDI was a revolution because it forced governments to acknowledge that money is only valuable in terms of what it can actually buy for human capability.
It's not just a high score in a bank account.
Right. It takes life expectancy at birth, expected in mean years of schooling, and gross national income per capita, and mathematically blends them into a single, clean score between 0 and 1.
And when you apply this metric to Luxembourg over the last 3 decades, you see an absolute masterclass in human development.
The curve is just relentlessly triumphant.
It really is. I was looking at the timeline, and in 1990, their HDI was 0.787, which, for the time, was already exceptional.
Very high for 1990.
But by 2023, they had climbed to an elite 0.922.
Yeah, putting them firmly in the UN's very high human development category.
Sitting comfortably at rank 25 out of 203 countries and territories globally.
And to understand why a score of 0.922 is so significant, you really have to look at how difficult it is to achieve those marginal gains at the top.
Like squeezing the last few drops out of a sponge.
Exactly. And we use Luxembourg for this deep dive because their demographic and geographic footprint is so small. I mean, a population of around 650,000, yet the economic output is staggeringly high.
They're like a hyper-concentrated laboratory.
Yes, they amplify the signals, both the good and the bad, of the entire Western development model.
Okay, let's pull apart those 3 pillars of the HDI, starting with the health data, because the sheer length of life they've achieved is just staggering.
It really is.
In 2023, a child born in Luxembourg can expect to live 82.2 years. And if we split that by gender, women are looking at nearly 84 years, while men are at about 80.6.
And you have to contrast that with the global average, which is hovering right around 73.4 years.
Wow.
So just by the geographic lottery of being born within Luxembourg's borders, you're statistically gifted almost an entire extra decade of life compared to the average human.
I was looking at the historical trajectory of this too. Between 1990 and 2023, Luxembourg added about 7.2 years to their life expectancy.
Which is phenomenal.
Right, because if a country goes from a life expectancy of 45 to 52, you can usually point to a few basic infrastructural wins.
Like building a clean water sanitation plant.
Yeah, or rolling out a nationwide measles vaccine. But adding 7 years when your starting point is already 75.
That is where the mechanics of longevity become incredibly complex and, honestly, astronomically expensive.
Because you're fighting different battles.
Exactly. When your population is already living to 75, you have effectively conquered the easy killers, the basic infectious diseases and childhood mortality. The enemies you are fighting at age 75 are systemic and degenerative.
Like complex oncology.
Right, oncology, cardiovascular decay, neurological diseases.
So buying those extra 7 years isn't about mosquito nets. It's about maintaining fleets of MRI machines, funding highly specialized surgical theaters.
And providing universal access to cutting-edge pharmaceuticals that might cost thousands of dollars a dose.
Which requires an insane amount of money.
Precisely. It requires a healthcare infrastructure that is not just responsive, but deeply preventative. It means regular, sophisticated screening for the entire adult population.
And the only way a society can sustain that level of medical infrastructure without bankrupting its citizens is by having an absolute fire hose of national wealth.
Which is the perfect entry point into the second pillar of their HDI.
The wealth itself, because this is the true engine of the Luxembourg model.
Right. And we measure this using gross national income per capita.
Adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP, which basically strips out the weird distortions of exchange rates so we can see what the money actually buys, right?
Exactly. And in 2023, Luxembourg's GNI per capita was $85,461.
That is the average national income per person.
Every man, woman, child, and retiree.
That's absurd. When you compare that to the global average of roughly $20,300, you really begin to see the scale of their prosperity.
They possess more than 4 times the average global wealth.
So what does a society even do with an $85,000 per capita average? Like, how does that actually change the fabric of daily life?
Well, it creates an almost impenetrable societal shock absorber.
A shock absorber. I like that.
Yeah, because when a financial crisis hits or a global supply chain breaks down, a society with that kind of baseline wealth can simply absorb the blow.
They can subsidize energy costs for their citizens?
Right. They can bail out critical industries. They can afford to import whatever they need regardless of price spikes. But more fundamentally, it funds the third pillar.
The relentless pursuit of knowledge.
Exactly. The education data reflects that perfectly.
The expected years of schooling for a child entering the system today is 14.3 years.
And for adults, currently over 25, the mean years of schooling is 12.5.
So they're keeping their population in classrooms, universities, and specialized training programs for a massive portion of their early lives.
And if you look closely at Luxembourg's specific context, that education is uniquely complex. I mean, it's a multilingual society nestled between France, Germany, and Belgium.
So the education system requires fluency in multiple languages.
Right, which creates a workforce that is hyper-adaptable to international business. This creates a deeply entrenched positive feedback loop.
Okay, let me trace that loop. The wealth funds the education. The highly educated multilingual citizens then build an incredibly complex, innovation-driven economy, which in Luxembourg's case is a massive global financial and banking sector.
That's right.
That sector generates even more extreme wealth, which gets poured back into the healthcare system, extending the lives of those highly educated workers so they can contribute to the economy for decades longer.
It is a flawless, self-perpetuating engine.
It really is the absolute ideal of the human development blueprint.
On paper, yes.
So wait, hold on. I need to stop us here because looking closer at the wealth data, this flawless engine has a massive glaring defect.
The gender gap.
Yes, the overall average income is $85,461. But when the UN splits that number by gender, the male GNI per capita is $100,195. The female GNI per capita is $70,537.
That is a stark, unavoidable reality in the numbers.
I mean, it's a $30,000 income gap. The men are hoarding a six-figure average while women are making 30% less.
It's a huge disparity.
How can we possibly call this a triumph of human development or point to them as a beacon of progress if the economic rewards of this engine are so profoundly and unevenly distributed?
And this is a crucial vulnerability in any national average, and it's exactly why the UN developed a secondary suite of indices to stress test the HDI.
Because averages can be incredibly deceptive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you have 10 people in a room and one of them is a billionaire while the other 9 are penniless, the average wealth of the room is $100 million.
Right.
But the lived reality for 90% of the room is absolute poverty. So to truly audit Luxembourg's success, we have to run their data through the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
Okay, so the GDI basically splits the country in two. It calculates a complete human development index solely for women and another one solely for men and then compares them.
Right, and a score of exactly 1.0 means the two groups are experiencing the exact same level of overall development.
So, keeping in mind that massive $30,000 income deficit for women, you would expect their GDI score to take a really heavy hit.
You would think so.
But it doesn't. Their GDI score for 2023 is 0.996. They rank 39th out of 194 countries, placing them in the UN's elite Group 1, which denotes countries with remarkably high equality in HDI achievements.
They are a statistical hair's breadth away from perfect parity.
So how does the math actually work there? How do women overcome a 30% wealth deficit to tie the men in overall development?
Well, it comes down to the compensatory nature of the other two pillars.
The health and education.
Exactly. The income gap drags the female score down heavily. The financial sector, which drives so much of Luxembourg's wealth, notoriously skews male at the highest executive echelons.
Sure.
However, look at the health and education data again. Women are living to 83.9 years, completely outpacing the male life expectancy of 80.6.
Right, that's almost an extra 3.5 years of life.
And furthermore, women in Luxembourg actually surpass men in expected years of schooling.
Oh, wow. So the extra 3 years of life, combined with the higher educational attainment, acts as a mathematical counterbalance.
Statistically, yes.
The extra time alive and the extra time in the classroom offset the fact that men control a significantly larger share of the bank accounts.
Right. But the UN demographers understand that this is a slightly hollow victory.
How so?
Well, because being healthier and more educated doesn't automatically grant you equal influence over how societies actually run.
That makes sense.
Health and knowledge are prerequisites for power, but they are not power itself.
Okay, wow, that's a great distinction.
And that realization led to the creation of the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Right, the GII is a completely different beast. It measures the loss in potential development due to gender inequality, focusing specifically on 3 areas: the labor market, empowerment, and reproductive health.
Let's look at empowerment first. Specifically, who is sitting at the table where the laws are written?
The data shows that women's share of parliamentary seats in Luxembourg has grown from exactly 20% back in 1990 to 33.3% in 2023.
Which is a sustained, meaningful increase. And it comfortably beats the global average, which is lagging around 26.5%.
Sure, it beats the global average, but I mean, it's 33.3%. That's 1/3 of the room.
Exactly.
2/3 of the legislative power is still held by men. We just celebrated a near-perfect GDI of 0.996, and Luxembourg ranks 17th globally on this inequality index, which sounds incredible on a press release.
It does.
But doesn't this dashboard number just gloss over the raw reality of power? Like, if men control the vast majority of the wealth and they hold a supermajority in the government, the impressive health and education stats start to feel a little bit like a smokescreen.
That is a deeply valid critique of how we consume indices.
Yeah.
Anytime you compress the immense complexity of a society's power dynamics into a single digit, you obscure the friction underneath.
You lose the nuance.
Right. The political and economic spheres in Luxembourg are still heavily weighted toward men. But there's one specific metric within the Gender Inequality Index where Luxembourg's performance is absolutely not a smokescreen.
What's that?
It is a raw, unassailable triumph of human infrastructure, and that is reproductive health.
Ah, right. The maternal mortality ratio and the adolescent birth rate.
Yes. In Luxembourg, the maternal mortality ratio is 6.48 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Wow.
And you have to contextualize this against the world average, which is a devastating 216 deaths per 100,000 live births.
6.5 compared to 216. That's night and day.
And in tandem, their adolescent birth rate is just 4.0 per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19, compared to a global average of nearly 40.
Let's actually unpack the mechanics of that maternal mortality number because 6.48 is essentially saying that dying in childbirth has been virtually eradicated.
Almost entirely.
So why does the UN weigh this one specific medical outcome so heavily when trying to measure a country's overall progress?
Because the maternal mortality rate is the ultimate stress test for a nation's entire societal fabric. You cannot fake a rate of 6.5.
Right, you can't just doctor the spreadsheets.
No, it does not happen by accident. And it does not happen just because you have a few good doctors. Achieving that number requires a sprawling, universally accessible, and fiercely resilient medical and social infrastructure.
What does that infrastructure actually look like on the ground?
Well, it means that the moment a woman becomes pregnant, regardless of her socioeconomic status, she is immediately integrated into a system of comprehensive prenatal care.
So it's proactive.
Highly proactive.
Yeah.
Her nutrition is monitored, genetic screenings are standard, and potential complications are identified months in advance. But the real test comes during delivery.
When things go wrong.
Exactly. If a sudden catastrophic complication occurs, like severe hemorrhaging or eclampsia, survival depends entirely on the system's reaction time. A rate of 6.5 means there's immediate, unhindered access to fully staffed emergency surgical theaters.
Nobody's waiting for a doctor to be paged from across town.
Right. It means the regional blood banks are perpetually stocked and logically distributed. It means highly specialized obstetric anesthesiologists are available 24/7.
So it's essentially the ultimate proof of value. If a health system is underfunded, or if it systematically marginalizes a specific demographic, maternal mortality is basically the canary in the coal mine.
It is the very first indicator to spike.
It's the first thing to break.
Exactly. Luxembourg has woven a social safety net so tight and so well-resourced that the most foundational, historically dangerous aspect of human survival, childbirth, has been rendered almost entirely safe.
That's incredible.
And that specific achievement is what catapults them to 17th in the world on the GDI. They have eliminated the lethal risks of gender disparity.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture we've painted so far.
Or Luxembourg model.
Right. The Luxembourg model grants 82 years of life, an average wealth of $85,000, near universal higher education, an ironclad reproductive safety net, and growing, if not yet equal, political empowerment.
They are sitting at the absolute peak of human achievement.
They really are. But remember what we said earlier about national averages hiding the truth?
Oh yeah, the billionaires in the room. Yeah.
Exactly. We've adjusted the data for gender to find the first flaws. Now we have to adjust for class. We have to look at how that massive prosperity is distributed across the entire population, regardless of gender.
And this brings us to the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, the IHDI.
The IHDI is fascinating because it basically penalizes a country for hoarding.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It looks at the average scores for health, education, and wealth, and then asks, is everyone actually experiencing this average?
Right.
Because if a small group of billionaires is dragging the average income up to $85,000, but half the country is struggling to pay rent, the IHDI docks your points.
Conceptually, it discounts the country's achievements by the level of internal inequality.
Mm.
If a society is perfectly equal, the IHDI perfectly matches the HDI.
So the gap is the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
The mathematical gap between the two numbers represents the exact percentage of human potential that is lost because of unequal distribution.
And when we run Luxembourg's data through this filter, the pristine image really cracks. Their elite HDI of 0.922 drops to an IHDI of 0.838.
That is a 9.1% overall loss in human development.
9.1%.
Yeah, they are leaving almost a tenth of their national potential on the table purely because of inequality.
Now, if you are listening to this, a 9.1% drop might not sound like the end of the world. But when you are competing at the very top of the global leaderboards, a 9% penalty is a massive stumble.
It's significant.
Let's look at the anatomy of that drop, because the inequality isn't spread evenly across health, education, and wealth, is it?
Not at all. The inequality in life expectancy is remarkably low, around 4.8%. The inequality in education is similarly minimal.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, this aligns perfectly with what we just discussed regarding their universal health care and robust public school systems. Those resources are broadly accessible to everyone.
So what's driving the drop?
The culprit driving the 9.1% overall loss is almost entirely income inequality.
The data shows that income inequality accounts for a massive 16.4% loss in the index.
Think about the lived reality of this for a moment. Luxembourg's economy is a hyper-specialized global hub for private banking, investment funds, and corporate headquarters.
So the top is very, very rich.
The wealth generated at the top of that financial pyramid is astronomical. But that wealth does not automatically translate to the people sustaining the physical reality of the country.
The people doing the actual ground level work.
Right. The individuals running the public transit, staffing the grocery stores, cleaning the corporate offices, and maintaining the hospitals. They're not living an $85,000 per capita lifestyle.
Definitely not.
In fact, because the immense wealth at the top drives up the cost of living in real estate, the working class often feels the squeeze of inequality much more acutely in a rich country than they might in a moderately wealthy one.
It's like looking at the average speed of traffic on a massive highway, but realizing that one dedicated lane is filled with billionaires and bullet trains going 200 miles an hour, while the other 3 lanes are filled with people pushing broken bicycles. And the statistician standing on the overpass calculates the math and announces, the average speed of this highway is a fantastic 60 miles per hour.
But literally nobody on the road is actually experiencing a 60-mile-per-hour commute.
Exactly. The average is a mathematical fiction.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize the danger of the unadjusted HDI. The IHDI forces us to see the broken bicycles.
Right.
It reveals that even the perfect country has a shadow. A working class that is structurally locked out of the peak prosperity their labor helps facilitate.
Okay, so the model has a shadow. A 9% drop is a heavy dose reality. But even with an IHDI of 0.838, Luxembourg is still vastly outperforming the vast majority of the planet.
Oh, without a doubt.
Even their adjusted reality is a level of development most nations are desperate to achieve. If the game is just about maximizing human well-being within your own borders, they're still winning.
Within your own borders is the operative phrase there. And that is the exact boundary the United Nations decided to demolish in 2020.
Oh man, this is the pivot. This is the moment the X-ray machine completely shatters.
It really does.
Because what happens when we stop looking exclusively at what Luxembourg provides for its citizens, and we start measuring what Luxembourg extracts from the rest of the planet to pay for it?
This is the introduction of the PHDI. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
The PHDI.
It is arguably the most important metric introduced in the 21st century because it fundamentally rewrites the rules of success.
Let's lay out exactly how the PHDI works, because this is the core of the entire paradox of prosperity we are dissecting today.
Let's do it.
The PHDI takes a country's standard Human Development Index score, and it aggressively docks points based on 2 specific environmental factors: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita.
The philosophy behind it is brutally simple. It asks, are you achieving your 82 years of life expectancy, your universal education, and your massive wealth by cannibalizing the Earth's atmosphere and depleting its raw resources?
Which is a heavy question.
Very, because if your prosperity is reliant on an unsustainable rate of extraction and pollution, your score is penalized. The higher the ecological pressure, the harder the fall.
And when we apply this planetary lens to Luxembourg, it isn't just a 9% stumble like with the inequality index, it is an absolute free fall.
The drop is so severe it almost looks like a clerical error in the data.
Their elite score of 0.922 falls off a cliff. It plummets roughly 48% down to 0.479.
And to give you some context on how devastating a score of 0.479 is, well, that is a number you typically associate with some of the least developed nations on Earth.
Really?
Yeah, nations that are actively struggling with severe poverty, lack of basic infrastructure, and systemic instability.
The global re-ranking is what truly exposes the paradox. By standard metrics, Luxembourg is the 25th most developed nation in the world.
Right.
But when you account for their planetary pressure, they plummet to 155th.
They lose 122 places on the global leaderboard instantly.
They go from being the role model to being a planetary liability.
Exactly.
So how does a modern service-based economy trigger a 48% penalty? Let's look at the 2 culprits, starting with carbon.
Well, the data shows Luxembourg produces about 10.68 tons of CO2 emissions per capita.
10.68.
This is essentially the carbon emitted within their physical borders to keep their society functioning, heating their homes, powering their financial servers, fueling their transportation network.
And the global average is about 4.5 tons of CO2 per person. So they are emitting more than double the global average.
Which is obviously bad, and it contributes to the penalty.
But it's the second factor, isn't it? The material footprint. That is the true killer of their ranking.
The material footprint is the metric that strips away the illusion of the clean service economy.
Let's define this clearly for everyone listening. The global average material footprint is 12.7 tons per person.
Right.
That means to sustain the average human being's lifestyle for 1 year, we need to extract 12.7 tons of physical matter from the Earth.
That includes biomass like timber and crops, fossil fuels like coal and oil.
Metal ores like iron and copper, and non-metallic minerals like sand and gravel for construction. 12.7 tons globally.
Now look at the resident of Luxembourg.
I have the number right here, and it's unbelievable. A single resident of Luxembourg consumes an astronomical 74.17 tons of material footprint every single year.
74 tons. I want you to really try to visualize the physical mass of 74 metric tons.
It's hard to even picture.
Well, picture a standard mid-sized car. It weighs about 2 tons. Now imagine a fleet of 37 cars.
37 cars for one person.
That massive pile of steel, glass, plastic, and rubber is roughly the equivalent mass of the raw earth that must be mined, logged, harvested, and excavated every single year just to sustain the lifestyle of one person in Luxembourg.
They're consuming raw materials at nearly 6 times the rate of the average human. But how? I mean, Luxembourg isn't a massive manufacturing hub anymore.
Right.
They aren't smelting steel on every corner like they did in the 19th century. They're a financial center. Bankers don't eat iron ore. Where is the 74 tons coming from?
This is where we have to understand the concept of embodied materials and how wealthy nations essentially offshore their environmental damage.
Embodied materials.
Yes, Luxembourg imports almost everything it consumes. When a citizen of Luxembourg buys a new luxury electric vehicle, the carbon and material footprint of that car wasn't generated in Luxembourg.
Oh, I see.
The lithium was mined in South America, the cobalt in the Congo, the aluminum smelted in China, the steel forged in Germany.
Yeah.
Massive amounts of raw earth were ripped up, processed, and shipped across the oceans.
But because Luxembourg is the end consumer of that product.
The PHDI assigns the weight of that entire global supply chain to Luxembourg's material footprint.
So the immense wealth of $85,000 per capita allows them to constantly consume high-end electronics, imported foods, luxury goods, and fast fashion, constantly turning over their material possessions.
Yes.
They are importing the finished utopia and leaving the massive, ugly craters of extraction in developing nations.
Exactly. They have achieved their pristine local environment by exporting the ecological devastation required to build it. Their incredible health, their staggering wealth, their decades of education.
These aren't just miracles of brilliant social policy.
No, they're the direct result of a massive, disproportionate, and entirely unsustainable siphoning of the Earth's finite resources.
My brain immediately goes to a neighborhood analogy here.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you have a neighbor who has won the Best Lawn in the City award for 10 years running.
Okay.
The roses are the size of dinner plates. The grass is a blinding emerald green. The fountains are beautiful. Everyone on the street looks at this house as the pinnacle of success.
The envy of the block.
Right. But then an investigator starts checking the plumbing, and you realize your neighbor has been secretly siphoning thousands of gallons of water from the municipal reservoir during a severe drought.
Oh, wow.
Not only that, they're dumping all their toxic chemical fertilizer runoff directly into the local river, poisoning the fish downstream.
Just hoarding and polluting.
Exactly. Sure, their specific garden looks immaculate, but they are literally destroying the ecosystem of the entire town to maintain it.
And the terrifying reality is, if anyone else in the neighborhood tried to grow a garden exactly like theirs, the town's entire water supply would dry up in a matter of days.
Yep.
They're exactly what the PHDI is trying to warn us about.
Yeah.
We are looking at a fundamental war between two models of existence.
On one side of the radar chart, we have the Luxembourg model. It mathematically solves human suffering to a degree our ancestors would think is actual magic. High income, long life, strong gender parity.
It pushes the boundaries of human capability outward into this massive area of advantage.
But on the environmental axis, the CO2 and the material footprint, that same radar chart completely collapses inward.
The data forces a grim, unavoidable conclusion for economists and policymakers. The current global ceiling for human progress is ecologically bankrupt.
Bankrupt.
Yes. If the rest of the world, if all 8 billion of us suddenly achieve Luxembourg's 0.922 HDI using Luxembourg's exact methods.
If everyone on Earth suddenly consumed 74 tons of material and emitted 10 tons of carbon.
The planetary boundaries would completely and instantaneously shatter.
Game over.
The global climate system would spiral out of control, the oceans would acidify beyond repair, and the resource base would be stripped bare. The mathematics of the Earth just do not allow for a globalized Luxembourg. It is a physical impossibility.
Which brings up the fascinating economic concept of marginal utility, specifically regarding how wealth relates to human happiness and health. Because the data shows that once a nation hits a certain threshold of wealth, Continuing to extract resources stops yielding meaningful human benefits.
Right. It's a diminishing return.
Yeah.
If you take a developing nation and move their average income from $5,000 a year to $25,000 a year, the marginal utility is massive.
Life-changing.
You are building water purification plants, establishing maternal health wards, paving roads. You are adding decades to the average lifespan. The environmental footprint increases, sure, but the human payoff is astronomical.
But going from $85,000 to $100,000.
The human payoff flatlines. That extra $15,000 might buy a larger house, a second luxury car, or more frequent international flights. It dries the material footprint from 50 tons up to 74 tons.
But it doesn't make the population fundamentally healthier?
No. It doesn't push life expectancy to 100. It just dramatically, recklessly increases the pressure on the planet for the sake of hyperconsumption.
Right.
The PHDI isn't just an academic exercise. It's a blaring warning alarm that our current definition of growth is broken.
Now, I want to pause and throw a wrench into this condemnation because I think it's important to view the data impartially and understand the real-world pushback you'd get.
Okay, let's hear the counter-argument.
Because if you talk to policymakers in Luxembourg, they will passionately argue that the 74-ton figure is a statistical illusion.
The commuter argument.
Yes. They will point out that they are a tiny, landlocked European country of 650,000 residents. But every single morning, over 200,000 cross-border commuters flood in from France, Belgium, and Germany.
It's a huge influx.
These commuters drive on Luxembourg's roads, work in the glass skyscrapers, consume energy, generate carbon, and then drive home to sleep in a different country.
Right.
So the defense is, our emissions and footprint are artificially inflated by international commuters and transnational logistics that serve all of Europe. You are dividing a regional footprint by a tiny local population.
That's the crux of it.
Are we unfairly penalizing a tiny country for being a geographic and financial crossroads?
Well, it is a very sophisticated defense.
Yeah.
And it is a known statistical quirk in how the UN calculates per capita data for small hub nations.
So they have a point.
They do. The commuters contribute immensely to the absolute footprint of the country, but they are not counted in the resident population denominator. So mathematically, yes, the per capita number of 74 tons is inflated by this cross-border dynamic. If you adjusted for it, the number would absolutely come down.
So does that invalidate the UN's ranking? Do they get their 25th place spot back?
Absolutely not.
Really?
While the cross-border defense softens the extremity of the 74-ton figure, it completely fails to invalidate the core thesis of the PHDI.
Why is that?
Because the commuters are not an accident. They are the very fuel of the model. Luxembourg's massive economic engine fundamentally relies on importing hundreds of thousands of workers, importing massive amounts of physical materials to build the infrastructure to house those workers, generating wealth through high-end financial services, and effectively exporting the ecological damage.
The system is working exactly as designed.
Yes. Even if you painstakingly redistributed the environmental cost of every commuter back to France and Germany, the systemic reality remains. A globalized model of high consumption, high waste prosperity is mathematically unsustainable. Luxembourg is just the canary in the coal mine, holding a very, very loud microphone.
If you're listening to this on your commute or while making dinner, I want you to think about what this journey through the data actually means for the world we are building right now.
It's a lot to process.
We started this deep dive at the absolute peak of human achievement. We looked at a society that has effectively bought an extra decade of life for its citizens.
We saw a nation that has nearly erased the gender divide in education and basic health.
Providing a reproductive safety net that virtually eliminates maternal mortality. I mean, they built the utopia we were promised.
But then we looked into the hidden valleys of the IHDI.
Right. Realizing that an average wealth of $85,000 masks significant income inequality.
Skimming nearly 10% off their human potential because the working class is left behind by the financial elite.
And finally, we experienced the precipitous 48% plunge into ecological unsustainability. We saw a nation fall 122 places in global rank because its beautiful garden requires siphoning the town's reservoir.
The UN dataset is telling us, in stark numerical terms, that the X-ray machine we have used to diagnose success for the last century is dangerously obsolete.
It's measuring the wrong things.
We have successfully learned the blueprint for lifting humans out of poverty. But the machinery we use to execute that blueprint requires consuming the earth at a rate that will eventually break the systems that keep us alive.
So why does a data set about a tiny European nation matter to you? It matters because as developing nations around the globe rightfully strive to lift their populations up, as billions of people look to the West and say, we want what Luxembourg has, we want 82 years of life and profound economic security.
We desperately need a new blueprint to offer them.
Exactly. Because if the rest of the world follows the current path of 74-ton material footprints, the progress will inherently destroy itself. We have to decouple human advancement from environmental destruction.
Which is, honestly, the greatest engineering, economic, and social challenge of our time.
Hmm.
How do we maintain the long lives and the brilliant education without requiring a mountain of raw earth to pay for it?
We are operating in diagnostic muddy waters, and the data leaves us staring at a profound tension. And I want to leave you with a final philosophical question to mull over. It's something the spreadsheets don't explicitly state, but it haunts every single row of the UN report.
What's the question?
Well, we have spent the entirety of the industrial age defining progress as humanity conquering nature to build better, safer, richer lives. We measure our success by how well we have insulated ourselves from the natural world.
Right.
But as the PhDI plunge shows us, we have finally reached the historical tipping point where conquering nature actually reverses our progress. If the ultimate goal of human advancement, the relentless pursuit of growth, inherently destroys the very stage we are standing on, do we need to invent an entirely new metric for success that doesn't just tweak the math, but fundamentally rewrites the rules of what a good life even means?